Hello and welcome to our podcast at Get Legally Speaking. Our legal conversation today will be on children disputes in relationships. This is part 2 of our Children Disputes in Relationships podcast, so please do listen to our part 1. I am here today with Miss Freya Rowe from Thomas More Chambers in Lincoln's Inn in London. Freya has been described as a tactical genius in her work as a barrister. Thank you for joining us, Freya.
Thank you for having me.
I'm just going to remind our listeners very quickly, Freya, of the 5 questions we covered in part 1. So if anybody thinks, I'd like to know the answer to that, they can go back to part 1 podcast and listen. And the 5 questions we did cover was, does a mother and a father have equal rights over their children after a separation? At what stage or age can a child decide not to see their mother or father? Another question, can a mother prevent a father from seeing his child? 4th question that we covered was, what can a parent do if the other parent is preventing them from seeing their child? And the last question we covered in part 1 was, if a mother and a father cannot agree on contact arrangements for the children, what could be the first steps to trying to resolve disputes like this without running to spend what could quickly become thousands of pounds to argue this through the courts? So we've started this off, I think, from one angle, because we know that every area of law has many, many angles. And the question that we're going to start with today, Freya, is, if I remarry, does this give me any less rights over my children than I have with an ex-partner?
Well, that's a very interesting question. It probably does affect quite a lot of people. The short answer is no, it doesn't make any difference at all. It doesn't make any difference if you're married to the mother or father of your children and then divorce and remarry. It doesn't make any difference if you simply live together and never marry and then remarry somebody else. Your actual marital status is completely irrelevant to the rights you have over your children.
Because there's lots of myths, and I've heard, if you remarry, then you can't see your children.
Yes.
It could be a jealous ex-partner, it could be a bitter ex-partner, it could be the families intervening and saying, you don't want another woman or man over your looking after your children or having access to them if your partner goes and marries, and so that's I think that's key.
I mean, the only relevance it might have is that obviously if your new partner stroke husband wife is living with you, then the reality is that they're going to be spending time with someone else's children.
Yes.
And so sometimes the courts want to look into a little bit about what that person is like, particularly if there are allegations that the new partner is unpleasant to the children, unkind or abusive or anything like
Which
that.
are very common allegations when one partner that hasn't married doesn't want their child going with mum or dad to a new partner's house. They say, they didn't feed them on time, they don't dress them properly, and
they're late to something.
Very common allegations, aren't they?
Yes, and then obviously some people are very genuinely anxious about the new partner coming into their children's lives because they might be quite a lot of negativity, they don't necessarily have the bond with the children that they do, and obviously there are cases reported in the news, which are the very extreme cases, which are very unusual, of step parents abusing and hurting their stepchildren, and that sort of adds fuel to the fire, I think, of people's anxieties. But in terms of your actual rights over the children, as long as you have parental responsibility, then your rights don't change at all. Parental responsibility is nowadays automatic if you're named as the mother or father on the birth certificate.
Yes.
And normally that is the case. Obviously, mothers are nearly always named on the birth certificate as the mother.
Yes.
Fathers are occasionally left off for some reason.
Yes.
If that's the case, then you can obtain parental responsibility either in writing by consent from the other parent, or if necessary, you can go to court and apply for parental responsibility, and the court can make an order. And really all the court would want to know is that there's some evidence that you are the biological father or mother of that child. And of course that's easy nowadays. You can prove that if there's a dispute about it with DNA test evidence.
Yes.
And the court can order a DNA test evidence if that is something that
even
is
if the other person is opposing that. And I think it's important to mention that you can never change a birth certificate. I didn't know that at the time that, when I had my children. But it's one document, it's one legal document you cannot change. So you can't say, right, I'm taking the mother off or I'm taking the father off. Cannot be changed.
It's very, very difficult. So but there are other ways to obtain parental responsibility. And that is central, really, to a lot of issues, because you can only apply for certain orders through the courts if you have parental responsibility. So my advice would be, if you are making applications to the court and you don't have parental responsibility, to include an application for parental responsibility as well. For example, if you are seeking a prohibited steps order, which is something I think we're likely to talk about today, you can't do that unless you have parental responsibility. So it is something to take seriously. Parental responsibility only gives you very basic rights. It doesn't give you rights to abduct your child necessarily.
Yes, because like that's our next question. And I mean, what I've made a note just now. I do want to do another podcast, because it's not in our list of questions today, to talk about parents that are on the birth certificate but have had nothing to do with the child's life for many years.
Right, yes.
That is actually, I think, a little bit more common than we like to think.
Yes.
It's very sad, but it is what it is.
Yes.
So I have made a note of that.
Yes.
But when we talk about...
And changing names, that's another big topic as well.
Yes, it is, absolutely. And I think, the next question actually links into this idea of abduction, because... the question is, can I stop my partner from taking our children on holiday? We've often taken calls from potential clients who have said they're taking the child, he or she, on holiday without my consent. That's abduction.
Yes. Well, to some extent, that may be right. The first thing, of course, is to check that you have parental responsibility. If you have parental responsibility, then it's not an offence to remove the child. However, it's fair to say that the Child Abduction Act does exist, and they do look at whether consent has been given by the parent.
Even if they've got parental responsibility?
Yes. It's obviously much worse if the person doesn't have parental responsibility and has taken them away.
Even though they're the biological parent?
Yes, that's right. But there are defences to child abduction. It can be considered a criminal offence. Some of the defences, for example, are belief in consent, or the parent would have consented had they been given time to give them all the information, that they try to communicate the information about the holiday, for example, and they're unable to, or the other person is just being ridiculously unreasonable withholding their consent. So one of the things to think about in terms of holidays is, where is the holiday? And look at the practical questions about going abroad, particularly. Is the holiday abroad? Is it in the UK? There's a massive difference between taking a child on holiday when it's quite obvious that the parent has their roots very firmly in this country.
Right.
If there is no genuine risk that parent isn't going to return with the child, then unless there are good reasons, which apply effectively to contact as well, where the parent shouldn't be having contact with the child, it's going to be difficult to argue that if they're already having regular contact with the child, it's going to be difficult to argue that the parents can see them for 2 weeks in London but can't see them for 2 weeks in Cornwall.
This is a really common area that we see, Freya, because what happens actually not necessarily in the beginning stages of a breakup, quite 2, 3, 4 years down the line, usually with the younger children, children under the age of 10, where in most cases it's been mum that says, no, you're not taking that child on holiday, either just the two of you or with your new girlfriend or with whoever. And father, in most cases, although it definitely can be the other way around, feels that that's the law.
Yes.
Then he can't. And I think the message really, because I've said this to a few clients over the years, and I think one of the key messages is you have to be reasonable.
Yes.
It's absolutely very, very difficult and very challenging to take your own emotions out of the picture towards your partner and think, well, he doesn't change the nappies as often if they're still in nappies, or he doesn't really care what they eat as much as I do, or bedtime's never bedtime. You've got to take some emotions out and think, is it reasonable for this person to go on holiday who's the parent of that child, or am I just being really extra sensitive and difficult,
or controlling, or jealous, for example?
The courts are not going to say just because they don't go to bed on time, or they don't eat perhaps organic vegan food on time, that they can't be taken by the other parent.
Well, and that's right. If they look at the child's interest, if it's in the child's interest to have a holiday, and it generally would be considered as long as it's in the school term holiday time, then why not allow them to go on holiday? But I think it's important to think about whether there are, first of all, any orders.
Court orders,
because obviously you don't want to be in breach of any court orders. So you shouldn't be taking the children on holiday when it's not your contact time, for example. If somebody has a residence order, then that automatically entitles them to be able to take the child on holiday for up to 28 days
a year.
And so.
Shared contact or residence,
residence, yes. People call it custody, but it's a residence order. Yes. If there is a residence order, which means that the child lives with one parent, for example, the mother, then that entitles the mother to go abroad for 28 days, even without consent of
now, that's
the other
very
parents.
interesting. That's very interesting, because if you've got a shared residence order, and I'm going to use the example of Dad. Dad's got a shared residence order because he has the children, for argument's sake, 2 nights a week. He automatically then qualifies to take the child without consent from mother. And, we have to remain sensible. You're not just going to one day disappear on a holiday with your child, but without the other parent saying, I agree to it.
Yes. The sensible thing to do is for both parents to set out some details about the holiday, where they're planning to go.
Contact
information, when they're coming back. If there's quite a lot of mistrust for some reason, perhaps even provide copies of return flight details, so it's obvious you're coming back.
Yes.
And if it's a situation where the parent is quite clearly not going to be, it's not genuinely a flight risk, they don't have, for example, if you're in a situation where, let's say the father is originally from India and doesn't have any ties at all to the UK,
all his family's
and is quite
in
clearly
India.
Unhappy here, and perhaps has threatened to take the child back to India
in the past,
and then is saying that he wants to go on holiday to India.
Yes,
then that could be threatening, in that it could be a ruse, of course, to pretend to go abroad for a holiday and not actually return.
Yes, with the child.
The facts of what is being suggested need to be carefully looked at. And also, of course, the country needs to be considered because, as we all know, the Hague Convention now covers a very wide selection of countries. If anybody is particularly interested, there are some very good websites on the Hague Convention if you Google it.
Yes, I think we need to talk.
It's basically
again,
Europe.
We need to explain what the Hague Convention is, because I don't think it's widely and commonly known what it is. But
if you're in Europe, it's covered basically.
What is the Hague Convention, Freya? Let's explain
an agreement.
That.
It's essentially it's an agreement. And it
amongst
covers
countries,
the aspects of international child abduction, and it's between a large number of signatories. Some of the more surprising signatories, because obviously you'd expect.
You mean the countries that have signed up to it? Yes.
There are more than you think, because it's not just Europe and America and Canada. There are quite a lot of countries, including, for example, Ecuador, Fiji, South Africa, Nicaragua, Mexico, Belize, Brazil, Japan.
So what we're saying, and people can, and we'll give the website details, I think that's very important. If you're worried that your partner's taking the child to a country where they might not come back from, if that country is on the list of the Hague Convention, then they've done a deal as part of the Hague Convention that if you say my child has been abducted and they're in that country, the law of that country is to work with you to return the child.
Yes, that's right.
In a nutshell.
And it's very effective. It's a very effective system. It is one where they try and ensure return of the child within 6 weeks.
Right.
And that is very often the case. But of course, it's not always completely straightforward.
Yes.
If, for example, the child doesn't want to come back, for example, and there are allegations made about the behaviour of the other parent
who remained in the UK and trying to get the child back.
It can be quite difficult. It's obviously best to avoid having to face Hague Convention proceedings. There is a very good, there's a lot of information on gov.uk website where it gives you a lot of advice about how to, for example, contact passport offices, embassies. You can try to stop, for example, the other parent from issuing passports for travel for the child.
And then there's the
police.
There's letting the UK border agency know if there is a flight risk. And what we mean by flight risk, if there's a risk that your child could be taken out of the country by the other parent or a relative that's helping the other parent. You could send a document to the UK border agency to put them on alert that this child is a flight risk.
That's right. And that remains live for 28 days.
It's quite a short time, Freya, don't you think?
It is, and you can't extend that time period unless you get a court order. But what it does allow you to do is have some breathing space, where you can then perhaps seek some legal advice. And I would recommend, although I appreciate a lot of people will want to represent themselves, this sort of issue is something where you may need some help.
Yes.
One of the very good agencies is Reunite.
Right.
It's a charity that effectively provides practical advice and information and support for children for families of children who have been abducted or wrongfully retained overseas. The other thing to bear in mind is speed is of the essence.
Yes.
What you don't want to do is, if your child has been removed, even to a Hague Convention country, is to just leave it and not do anything about it, or do anything which is in fact possibly suggestive that you agree to the child remaining where they are.
Is there a time limit, Freya?
There's not a
time limit for you to do something.
There are time limits. There are quite a lot of time limits in the procedure. So the first thing really to do is to make sure if you are in any communication with the other parent, make it very clear in that communication that you do not accept that they should have taken their child abroad. Or if you've accepted that they go abroad, for example, for a holiday and they're refusing to return, that you do not accept that they should not be returning at all. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to communicate anything ambiguous, because sometimes parents feel a degree of ambiguity because they then worry the child has been there has been enrolled in a school, for example, in New Zealand or wherever it is, and then they worry about unsettling the child further, and sometimes send quite placatory messages about it, which could be then used against them to suggest that they in fact
because emotions can run high very, very quickly. I mean, this is a very very sensitive subject, to women and men with children. The emotions are high if you're disagreeing anyway. Yeah. Your child's been taken away, perhaps on the basis that, we're only going on holiday, and off they're gone, they're not coming back. I'd say certainly seek legal advice straight away.
Yes.
Without delay, honestly. It's not an area of law that I think you want to sit there and try and Google and come up with the answers to it.
I agree.
And I think...
You can do some things yourself. For example, contacting, like you said, the Port Alert. Those sort of basic things you can do
UK
yourself.
border agency, things like that.
And Reunite are very, very helpful. But I think it would be best if you can get some legal advice about that.
And I think, again, we need to mention again to both parents, you've got to be reasonable if a parent genuinely wants to go on holiday. They're set up here with work, with family, with life, and you just don't be difficult for the sake of being difficult, because really it gets nobody nowhere.
That's right. It doesn't
and
really
the children
help the
hear
children
all
at the
these
end of the day.
arguments. Even if you try and... Sorry. Even if you try and protect the children from hearing it, they do. You could be mentioning it to your friends or your parents or someone. Oh, he wants to or she wants to do this. And the children always hear these things, and it's so sad for them, because you might think that their little ears are not really doing anything with the information, or they don't understand quite yet. But they do.
Yes.
They do. They understand a lot.
Well, that's right. And there's obviously a massive difference between somebody wanting to take their children to Centre Parks, for example.
Yes, of course.
For a week, and wanting to go to a country which is not in the Hague Convention, when they have family there, and
then they're not set up here properly,
may not necessarily return. So you do need to think about these sort of things proportionately and sensibly.
Yes.
There are ways, if you are genuinely concerned that somebody is going to be taking your children away.
I just want to say one thing there. Sorry, Freya. We've got to differentiate between someone taking your children and not returning, and someone taking your children on a holiday that you don't want them to go on.
Yes.
I think that's really important, because I only had this discussion with somebody a few weeks ago. It was actually a friend of mine who said, oh, she doesn't let me take our child away. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, no, she just doesn't let me, even though he has the child 2-3 nights a week already and things like that. I said, well, that's got to be absurd. It's not up to her whether you can go on holiday with your children or not, or child.
That's right.
So we've got to differentiate. We're now talking about, you're worried your child's not going to come back with the other parents, i.e. they're going to be abducted effectively. This is not because you don't want them to go on a certain holiday that you know they're going to return back from.
Yes, and
right?
enjoy as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So I do apologise, please.
If that's the case, if you can't reach any agreement, I wouldn't suggest that you take the child on holiday anyway and risk it, because even if you line up evidence to show that the other parent has unreasonably withheld their consent, it does put the children in the middle of a conflict between the parents about the holiday. It's likely to spoil the holiday. It may mean that there are future difficulties about holidays and things. So it's really better to try and obtain consent. If that doesn't work, of course, the parties can try mediation.
Yes.
If mediation doesn't work, then a parent can apply for what's called a specific issue application under the Children Act to go on holiday. And if necessary, I mean, you'd have to make that application quite some time ahead of any planned holiday, because realistically,
you're bound by the court timetable.
Yes, the court is unlikely, simply because they are so busy, to be able to list a fully contested hearing where, for example, both parties might give evidence, that they might adduce evidence, documentary evidence about the country they're going to, even expert evidence about the country that they're going to, may be required if there are some concerns that it's not a Hague Convention country. They occasionally, international lawyers are asked to give an opinion or an advice about what the other parent could do to reassure the parent that they are coming back, and if they didn't come back, what the laws of that country would be.
Yes.
Because the fact that the country isn't in the Hague Convention, of course, doesn't necessarily mean that the country would do nothing about it.
Yes, no, of course.
But of course, then you might have to go abroad to actually argue in the courts abroad, which can be extraordinarily difficult for people to do.
Yes.
But you can apply for a specific issue application. I would probably give yourself 6 months or so, if at all possible, before any planned holiday.
I'd say,
realistically,
depending on your local court, and perhaps don't book the holiday until if you are going to apply for to try and get a court order to be able to go on holiday, because your partner says absolutely no way, I'm not letting you go for whatever reason. I wouldn't book anything. Go to court, make the application, inform the court and the judge where you want to book, what you want to do, and try and get as many issues, if you do end up in court like that, really, as dealt with as possible.
Absolutely. And for example, future holidays, because the sensible thing would be to apply to go on a specific holiday, and then to say that you'd like to be able to take the child away, for example, during your contact time during the holidays, for example. example.
Yes.
And the court is likely to be sympathetic to that, I think, if it's quite obvious that you are simply just wanting a nice holiday with your child. If you want to stop somebody who has parental responsibility from taking your child abroad or even on a holiday in the UK, then you can make a variety of applications. The obvious one would be what's called a prohibited steps order, which is really what it says on the tin. It's to prohibit certain steps from being taken. In this particular case, prohibit travel abroad. And the court, along with a prohibited steps order, can order, for example, that the parent is not to apply for any passport or travel document for the child, as well as stopping them from leaving the jurisdiction of the United Kingdom.
If the court finds that no, there is a flight risk, there is a reason why this person shouldn't take their child.
Yes.
And again, I say it again because you sometimes we take some calls and it's because I just don't think he or she's going to apply enough sunscreen, or they'll probably drink too much while they're there. And they are not really key reasons.
No.
It's of course you want your child looked after brilliantly, but not doing everything brilliantly all the time that brings no harm really to the child is not a reason to go to court and say, I will not allow this holiday to happen because the bedtime's not going to be set, they're going to eat too much ice cream and things like that. Freya, that's all we've got time for. And I can't believe we've actually covered some really, really good ground, but only gone to question 3. So once again, thank you ever so much for being a part of this podcast. I'm looking forward to all the parts that we're going to continue recording, because there is so much. There's so much to cover. So thank you once again. Don't forget to click and subscribe to our podcasts. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn by searching Get Legally Speaking. Also visit our website at getlegallyspeaking.com. Thank you for listening.